think it's still coming up. Um, from your end, can you confirm if it has gone live? Because you showing just
Yes, it
the
has gone
profile
live now.
picture.
I think that there's usually like a
Okay,
10 seconds delay between when
okay,
we click on go live and when go live it actually
we are
start
live now.
broadcasting on YouTube. Nice.
Okay, so I'll get started immediately. See if I have people joining. Okay, yeah. Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever be that you might be joining us from. On to another amazing monthly episode Talk2Series. This month we are hosting our esteemed speaker and MVP David Okeyode. Did I get that right? Who will be
Yeah,
speaking to us on?
yeah. Yeah.
David will be speaking on how cloud security tips for success field. Um, so let me so David Okeyode is the EMEA Chief Technology Officer for Azure. At, before that, he was an independent consulting environment through private expert level training and assessment. He's an author of two books, which is currently on Amazon: Penetration Testing Azure for Ethical Hackers and Microsoft Azure Security Technology Certifications and beyond. He has also authored multiple cloud computing courses for popular cybersecurity training platform Cybery. He holds 15 cloud certifications across Azure AWS platform, including Azure Security Engineer, Azure DevOps, and Azure AWS Security Specialist certification. Mr. David has over a decade of experience in cybersecurity and over 7 years experience as a trainer. He has worked with organizations of various sizes, from startups to major enterprises organization. Mr. David has developed multiple security procedures by designing automation templates that can be used to practice cloud penetration testing techniques, regularly speaks on cloud security at user groups and major industry events like Microsoft Future Decoded and the European Information. Mr. David is married to a lovely girl who makes the best banana cake in the world. They love traveling the world together. So it's a pleasure for us to have Mr. David on the call with us this evening with us wealth of knowledge. So, Mr. David, the floor is yours, sir.
No, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Solomon. Thanks very much for that lovely introduction, and nice to meet you also. So yeah, so I was thinking. So just to mention like ahead of time, so I don't have like any slides or anything prepared. So
Okay,
I'm open to like taking any questions that people may have in terms of like
okay,
building like a career in cloud security and sharing some
yeah,
information. But I can just sort of like just talk about things just in general, right?
okay,
And then we take questions as questions come up. So again, thanks very
okay,
much for that lovely introduction.
pleasure, sir.
Yeah.
Okay,
So maybe just to give like a quick overview in terms of what cloud security is in terms of like as a career, right? So this is something that's a bit more newer, right? So traditionally, we've had security professionals in the industry, right? We've had a well-built security professional ecosystem that existed for years. With people securing on premises traditional infrastructures. You have people that focus on network security, people that manage like firewalls and that manage network proxy and intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems. We've had people that focused on application security. We've had people do like all these different aspects of security for multiple years. But cloud security is one that's a bit newer and it's sort of like a career path that's rapidly evolving. Right. So it's not something that's like fully fully set yet. It's something that's rapidly evolving as you're sort of like studying and seeing what the industry is doing, what the market is doing, what the threat actors are doing in terms of the attackers, what the security researchers are coming up with, and trying to put all of that together to sort of like form a way, like a career path, sort of like in the industry.
Okay.
So it's sort of like something that's much more newer. So maybe I'll just tell like a brief story in terms of like how I got into cloud security. I think my path into cloud security is similar to the path of a lot of people. So I I went to university to study computer network administration and management, right? So I finished that, and I got um, I got a job in a cybersecurity company. So one of the top endpoint security companies in the world at the time. So I got a job working within the company, and that was where I started like just cutting my teeth on something on sort of like the basics of security, or just understanding like what security looks like. So I was lucky enough to work for some really, really brilliant and amazing people that sort of like um, gave me responsibilities that helped me to grow.
Okay.
Right. And that's an important part to really mention in terms of um, you can learn as much as you want to learn, but in order to grow, you have to actually put to practice what you've learned in order to be able to grow, right? So learning, studying, practicing, all that is good, but you have to actually do what you're learning in an environment for you to be able to grow and to be able to develop. So anyways, I was lucky enough to get people to like put me like on that part, and mainly I started mainly like on the part of like network security. So I remember building like a whole IDS, identity detection, identity prevention for the whole company in terms of setting the policy, setting the detections, setting all of that together. You know, as a young engineer, given like these responsibilities was tasking, but I learned a lot, right? Writing automation template, automation scripts to put some ideas into motion for the company. So again, it was very, very interesting. So moving on from there, I sort of like dabbled in sort of like infrastructure a bit. I realized, it's one of those things. I'm not sure if that ever happened to you before, Mr. Olumide, where you thought, oh,
Yeah.
I think you love something until you actually started doing that thing, and then you're like, this wasn't what I was
Like,
expecting. I'm not sure if that's ever happened to you before.
yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So, because what happened to me was I was like, oh, I was always imagining in my mind I wanted to be in infrastructure. Right? Infrastructure is the place to be. And then I got into infrastructure, and then at 2 a.m. in the morning, my phone will be going off because something is broken. Then I'm not sure what we, but I had like a PagerDuty application on my phone, right? And then whenever
Okay.
you're on call, you're getting calls at 2 a.m. And when you get calls at 2 a.m., you have like about 30 minutes to be in front of your computer, ready to troubleshoot issues. And I'll be out with my wife on a Saturday, and then you get paged because a critical part of the infrastructure is going down, and you have like 1 hour to get to your laptop. So you cannot go too far from home, because if you go too far from home, you don't have 1 hour enough to. I'm like, I'm not sure this is the kind of life that I want to
Indeed.
live. I'm not sure I want this kind of life where I can't really go out on Saturdays with my family. I can't really do anything. I've got to be close to my computer all the time. And there's always like constant panic, right? So that was like, man, I'm not sure this is for me. So then I started looking for other options to go out. So essentially, I went back to network security path. I went back to the path of
Okay.
network security. But then as I got back into network security, we started hearing a lot about these things, this AWS, Azure, and all of these platforms were starting to gain popularity then. We're starting to come out then. So Azure then, it was the old Azure interface, the Azure Service Manager interface.
Okay.
So, I remember just studying, watching videos on plural sites to try to understand what is going on in sort of like this sphere and this space. And in the company that I worked then, um, this started to come up also in conversations. So a lot of people will be avoiding that, but I was sort of like saying, pass all of this to me, right? So like, pass it
Okay.
to me, don't worry. I'll go study, I'll go figure out what's going on in this case, and I'll handle that. So that was sort of like my path in terms of in network, in sort of like cloud security. That was how I got involved in the beginning. It was more like everybody else was sort of like avoiding it. I came on board, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm willing to study. I'm willing to push myself in a new direction that I'm not familiar with, and essentially that was how I ended up in like cloud security, and essentially everyone started passing anything relating to that to me, and I just took that on. So as time went on, the company that I was with acquired another company that produced cloud security products. So I was brought into that group within the company. So I was one of the founding members in terms of like that cloud security function or that business unit of that company. And from then, it's just evolved since then. So that's my story. Now I ended up in cloud in cloud security. It's more
Imagine.
like,
Interesting story.
yeah, stuff like opportunity versus like just willingness to learn new things, willingness to adapt.
Okay. So that's a very interesting story, sir.
Yeah,
Just to our audience, please, you have questions. This is meant to be live chat, so let's try as much as possible to make it interactive as possible. So please, we can drop our questions in the chat. I'll be so grateful to read them out so that Mr. David can answer them.
yeah, exactly. I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Okay. Um, First, I have a question. Just
Yes,
following,
yes.
listening to your story and how you got into cloud engineering, into cloud security. Considering that you came from a technical background, I think maybe the switch might have been a bit easy, kind of. For someone coming from a non-technical background,
Hmm.
how would you advise them to approach a career in cloud security?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. So um, I'll probably start out like, so whenever I talk about technology, right? So I
Yeah.
I usually start out with the aspect of interest is important, right? Someone has to have an interest in that area. It's important. There's so many areas of security that you can go into that there's no reason to struggle to push yourself into an area that is not you, right? If you're a non-technical person in the security space, there's a space for you without without having to be technical, if that makes sense, right? There are project
Yeah.
managers in security that focus on security. They are not technical, right? They may not be like the most technical people, but they focus their project management expertise on cybersecurity. So essentially, just to mention that and put that out there to say, don't try to force yourself into something that's not you, right? So it's the same way if you try to like force maybe someone like me like into certain roles, it would not fit, right? I would struggle because
Yeah.
that's just not like who I am. That's not like who I am at my core. That's not my makeup in terms of like how I function, right? So that's just to mention that. So someone that maybe you've not done security in the past, however, you have an interest and you think that you're developing certain interest in the technical area, I'll probably just say try many things, right? So try out many
Okay.
things because that's sort of like the way that you can also use to pick out what flows with you more. So what I mean by that is I'll say start with the basics of like cybersecurity, right? Do a little bit of network security. Do a little bit of application security. See if you have more interest in one versus the other. And then if you find out that you have interest in a particular area, then double down on that area and then build on that area, right? So the reason why I say that is this. I'll tell you something on LinkedIn. So many people have reached out to me, of course, privately, and they go, David, can you mentor me? Can you provide guidance to me in terms of cloud security, in terms of your career and everything? And one of the things that I find out is that I can list a list. I can give people a list of instructions and says, Olumide, this is what you need to do. Here's like 15 things that will get you on the
Okay.
path in terms of being a cyber cloud security professional. But what I find out is that probably only about 3% or 4% of people that I interact with that way ever actually
Well,
do that. Right? Ever actually do like what when I say, oh, here's a list of like 15 things. Number one, go through this playlist on YouTube and do this one. And then number two, go through this on this one and do this one. Probably only about 2% of people that I speak with actually do that. And
wow.
I started looking at the reason for that. And the reason that I found for that is it's a tough thing when you're taking on something new and it's not something that you are, right? So
Yeah.
you're doing something and all of a sudden it's like nothing is making sense. You begin to question yourself, man, am I in the right am I in the right is this the right thing for me to be doing? What am I doing here? Nothing is making sense, right? And everything. And at that point, a lot of people can easily drop out, right? And just easily go,
Yeah.
man, I'm not sure this is for me or anything. So that's why it's very important, I think, to focus on something that's you to start with.
Okay. Uh, okay. I think I got that clear. So the major thing is to try out a lot of things, see what you're interested in, and double down on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I'll say
So
that. So, and if you're non-technical, there are multiple career paths for you to be in in cloud in cybersecurity also. So again, we have people that are project managers that manage projects. We have people that deal with sales, right?
yeah,
That may not necessarily be technical, but they're
yeah,
very good at positioning products. But they work in cloud security or cybersecurity.
very true. I agree with you, sir. Okay, I think we have some questions in the chat. The first I have here is how do you stay consistent in cloud security?
Hmm.
How do you stay
That's a
consistent in cloud security?
That's also a very interesting one. So, how do you stay consistent? So, I'll give you like my own take on that. So, I'll tell you like a
Okay,
story of again how I've developed over time in my career, right? So, um, initially when I was learning some aspect of cloud security, right,
yeah,
I did a lot of self study, right? I was trying to, get books and watch training videos and all of that stuff. However, what I found out with myself was I can start out with like let's say chapter one of this book on cloud security,
yeah,
and in the next 3 hours, I'm on something completely different, right? So because what will happen is I'll see like maybe in chapter one of the book, maybe the person made mention of something relating to DNS. And then I'm like, oh,
yeah,
what's that aspect of DNS? And I go on Wikipedia. What's the aspect of DNS? And before Wikipedia, from that link, I'm on another link, and then I'm on another link, and then I'm on another link. Before you know it, I'm completely somewhere different than
yeah,
when we started. And we all have different things that in terms of like how we approach things that way, right? So for me, what I
yeah.
find out that helps me to that works for me is that I have to be in a structured environment. If I'm not in a
Okay,
structured environment, my mind being curious, I get carried away into many other things. So what I did was I registered for a class, right? And the main advantage of registering for a class for me was not because of they're teaching me something that I cannot find by myself. The main advantage was it gave me a structure that I have to stick to. Right. So when I show up in class, I'm not the one in charge of the agenda for the day.
yeah,
Someone else is in front is like, we're David, whether you like it or not, we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 today. And you're going to go through all these 5 today. That's my job here today
yeah,
to make sure that you go through all this 5. I'm like, okay, yeah.
yes,
So I'm with other people. So I've got to go through all of that stuff. So I found out that for me, I've got to put myself in a structured environment if
yeah,
I'm going to be consistent to get something from the beginning all the way to the end. Otherwise, I would not finish reading a book because by
mm,
the time I get to chapter 2, I'm somewhere else. In the middle
yes,
of chapter 3, I'm completely somewhere else. I'm jumping, up and down, doing, that's still happening to me. Like I'm meant to be, I'm writing another book at the moment, by the way. So I'm
okay,
writing the book, and as I'm writing the book, I'm doing some research, and I'm completely researching something else, not relating to the book. By the, by the end of the thing. So for me, I have to put myself in a classroom environment that helps me to stay structured. So that's number one.
okay,
So that's number one. So I'll say, look at yourself. If you know that you're not one of those people that can be structured in your self-study, find a class, register for a class that will give you that structure where you can go from the beginning to the end. Number two thing that I do, I have a group of people that we do group study together. So maybe some of them are even on the call today. I'm not sure if Sir Kofi is on the call today. So we have Sir Kofi,
okay,
um, who is my good friend. We have Taiwo. We have Sheyi. So like all of these people are people that are really close to me.
yeah,
And what we do is 2 days a week. Mondays and Tuesday, 1 hour every 1 hour per day. So that's 2 hours every week.
Week.
We all come together on the call, right? And we have we rotate it. So I may be the one setting the agenda for the next 1 month. Kofi
Okay.
may be the one setting the agenda for the next 1 month. Taiwo may be the one setting the agenda for the next 1 month. So we rotate it, and then when I show up, Taiwo has an agenda of study that we are going through. For 1 hour on Monday, 1 hour on Tuesday. So we go through like the study plan that Taiwo has, and then we go to Kofi's plan for the next 4 weeks. Yeah. So
Okay.
that helps to also stay consistent when you're in a group of other people, right? So because you're in
Yeah.
a group, it's much more easier. So essentially what I'll say is to stay consistent, understand yourself. If you've tried to stay consistent by yourself and you're finding it difficult, don't beat yourself up. Many of us are like that, right? Just find a way to essentially hack yourself using the security term. Find a way to hack yourself in a consistent way, either by putting yourself in a classroom in a structured environment, right? Or
Yeah.
either by putting yourself in a group study where you have to show up whether you like it or not.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think that was very precise. Okay. I hope what's the person's name? Gerson Chapman. I hope that answers your question. Okay, we have another question here from Emmanuel Itoje. Do I need to have a cyber security? Do I need to have cyber?
Oh, I think that's um oh okay. I think he's back. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can I hear you now? Yes, you're back
Okay,
now.
yes. Okay, I think net. Okay, so we have another question here from Emmanuel Itoje. He's asking that do I need to have cyber security knowledge before joining cloud security?
The answer to that, if you ask me like in the past, I would have said yes, but the answer to that, I'll say no, you don't.
Okay.
Right? I'll say what is more what is more important in learning cloud security is
Yeah.
the previous cybersecurity experience or cloud knowledge. I'll probably say cloud knowledge is more relevant than previous cybersecurity experience, right? So I'll say no, you do not need to have previous cybersecurity knowledge in joining cloud security. Having previous cybersecurity knowledge, does that hurt you? No, it doesn't hurt you. In technology, there's no wasted knowledge. Even if you have knowledge of Excel, right? In technology, that knowledge will be reusable somewhere else. So in
Yeah.
technology, there's no knowledge that's wasted. So it does not hurt you to have previous cybersecurity knowledge, but it's not needed. It's not compulsory.
Yes,
If
it's not
anything,
important
yeah,
but necessary.
exactly.
Okay.
If anything, it can actually put you in a good position because in some cases, when you're doing cloud security, in some situations, you have to
Yeah.
unlearn certain things, right? So I'll give you an example. You've been taught, like maybe you've been doing network security for years. You understand all these protocols, all these GRV protocols and multicast protocols. And then you get so cloud security and you're doing cloud network security and you find out that multicast does not work in the cloud, right? Because for security reasons, the
Okay.
cloud providers have to block that protocol. So now you have to unlearn the way you're used to doing network
Yeah.
security on the premises to be able to adjust, your knowledge to doing network security in this in this environment. So I'll say, you don't have to have previous cybersecurity knowledge, Emmanuel. Just start with your cloud studies and then move
Great.
into cloud security studies, which I'll share some thoughts with you later in terms of some study path that you could follow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that answer.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Man, I hope that answers your question. Okay, I think someone also made a suggestion on the chat. Okay, when you mentioned about not rules that non-technical persons can take on cloud security, it means IT governance can be done within cloud security.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is
So
absolutely
we have
true.
another question here from Emmanuel. Okay, what are the learning paths to cloud security for someone that does not have knowledge in IT?
Yeah.
I think
So very good question. So we're in an Azure security meetup group, right? So,
yeah.
we're in an Azure meetup group, and it's the same whether it's for Azure or for any other cloud. I'll say start with the cloud fundamentals, right? So for example, in Azure, that would be your AZ. I mean, talking from a technical perspective now, that would be like things like your AZ104, your AZ204, your AZ400 courses and certifications. I'll say start with those first. So why do I need to start with that? So you take like
Okay.
physical security, for example, like Olumide. So if you're doing
Yeah.
physical security, what you find out is that people that are really experts in physical security, they have a strong understanding of the environment that they have to secure, right? They can
Yeah.
tell you how many exits exist in that environment.
Moment.
For this environment, we have 5 exits: exit one, exit two, exit three. Oh, by the way, you can also go through the ceiling through this one. So that's another way that somebody could get to escape out.
Really.
And so when they
Okay.
when you task them, when task somebody said you're responsible for protecting the president, they have to know all the entries, all the exits, all the potential spots where an attack could come from, and all of that stuff. So having an
Yeah.
understanding of what you're responsible for protecting, it's
Okay.
helpful in doing your job in protecting that environment. So having an understanding of, oh, this is what this service is used for. This is how a developer will use that service. This is what this resource is used for. This is how a developer would use that. So that is very helpful. So I'll probably say number one, start out with your cloud fundamentals. Start out with your AZ 104s. Start out with your AZ 204s.
Okay.
Certifications. Start out by understanding AZ400. So we have Sir Rafael on the line, does amazing work in terms of helping people to understand like DevOps. So, follow people like Sir Rafael, and I'll say start out with that.
Okay.
And then after that, I'll probably say you want to understand like the fundamentals of cloud security of the provider. So that would be something like your AZ500 for Azure. AWS have their security specialty
Okay.
path. It's same with Google Cloud. But what I'll also say is this: is you want to the things that I mentioned now, they're good, but they're not sufficient, in my
Yeah.
opinion, to get you to stand out, right? So they're good, but they're not sufficient to get you to stand out. If you want to get to stand out, I would recommend adding things extra to that. So depending on whether you find out that you're much more like defensive minded or so Tosi asking something. Thanks very much for bringing that up, Tosi. So depending on whether you're much more um, offensive minded or defensive minded, you could look to add like other parts to that in terms of. So I'll give you an
Okay.
example. If you're doing Azure security, in my own opinion, and you're offensive minded, there's certain people that you should be following. So I'll put certain names like on the chat window. So for example, people like Carl Forsyth. So Carl has been doing offensive Azure security before it became popular, right? He has tons of
Okay.
blogs out there. He was the one that we co-wrote the book together on Azure pen testing. So Carl and myself co-wrote it together. So we have Carl. We have the person who wrote Bloodhound, which is used for attack path on Azure. So the person that wrote Bloodhound, so his name is Andrew Robbins. So um, he also now focuses on Azure attack path. I'll say follow that, because then that will get you certain level of insight and knowledge that you may not necessarily find in terms
Yeah.
of with AZ500 or the Azure ones. So I can see Tosin mentioned earlier in terms of like the SC certifications,
Exams.
and I can see Antonio also mentions those. So in terms of like
Okay.
the SC 200s and the SC 900s and the SC 300s, I'll say those can be useful also. So and thanks very much for bringing that. So the SC
Yeah.
we can more focus on like sort of like security operations, security analysis. So I'll say the SC 200 as what's mentioned. The SC 100 can also be useful. SC 300 also. So I'll say do those. I'll say those can be useful. But from my own opinion, just to tell
Mhm.
you my own opinion, again, this is my own opinion. So in joining with what other people have said, is that in order to be effective, I think, except you work for like a purely Microsoft house, you need something more than those, in my own opinion. So my own opinion is to try to, because what I find out is that with the certifications, they are great for having the foundational knowledge, but sometimes what I
Yeah.
find with them is they put people like they can put you in a box where where essentially they've structured those certifications in such a way that the knowledge is tailored in a particular way, right? Not to think outside of like the way that they've tailored like those knowledge. So I think personally, I think that if you want to stand out, you need to challenge some of those and you need to move beyond. So I give you an example. So for example, like in Azure, Azure is a great cloud platform. In the past 1.5 years, I can count about 15 vulnerabilities in the Azure cloud that's been disclosed by security researchers. 15 of them. Now, none of the Azure courses will actually mention or teach you anything about how those vulnerabilities were discovered, how those vulnerabilities were, found by security researchers. What mistakes did Microsoft make behind the scene? Is there anything that you could have done as a security professional to secure your organization, even if Microsoft are making mistakes behind the scene? So that's where you need to add like some additional things. That's where you need to be following certain people. You need to make sure that you're always, in the security research community, in the cloud security research community, to find out what is coming out, what is going on out there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Of
Okay.
course.
Let me take the other questions here. Okay. Okay. Well, I think. Oh, when you shared your experience about structured learning, Adetoyi also agreed with you. I think I also agree with you actually because it's for curious mind. It's actually going to stay because you keep moving from subjects to subjects. So I
Yeah.
think structured learning is a way to go.
It is. So personally, I think that it's a combination of both because I can't
Okay.
tell you like a lot of the blogs that I write
Yeah.
them from the curiosity, like to your point, right? So
Yeah.
because I'm curious about, so I'm like, oh my God, actually, how many of this has happened in Azure in the past few years? Then I begin to look into that. So I think that is awesome. But to your point, if you're going to be building a career, people will especially accept some base knowledge, which means you have to have gone through certain, they expect you have to have covered, 1 to 10, like you have covered this. And if you keep bouncing around, you're not going to cover everything that you need to have covered in order to be functional in your career.
Mm.
So that is why I think it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of sort of like putting yourself in a structured environment where you can go through like what you need to go through, but at the same time, being curious to be able to go look and connect certain things because that's where my blogs come from. Some of the information that I put in some of my books, that's where they come from. They come from me looking out there and then bringing a concept that I found somewhere else and then
Yeah.
bringing that to Azure. Maybe I read somebody talking about something and I'm like, that sounds interesting. What if I take this concept and I apply that to Azure from a security perspective? What does that give me?
Okay.
I'm like, oh my God, this is very, very interesting, right? But it's a combination of both. So, but that
Okay.
structure is very important.
Important. Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification. Okay. I have another question. I would like to transition from InfoSec to Azure pen testing. I have no ethical hacking skills. How do you recommend starting that transition?
Yeah. So easy way, transitioning to Azure pen testing.
Yeah.
Read the book that we wrote. So
Mhm.
this is not like this is
Yeah.
not like sales. So only for guessing, I'm not saying this to anyone else, but for guessing, reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me see if you really cannot afford the book. Reach out if you really cannot afford the book. That is, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let me see if there's a way to hook you up with with the publisher and something. So the reason why we wrote the book was exactly for that reason, right? So because you don't have anything out there for someone who is offensive minded in Azure to sit down and go through like the structure that we talked about, right? Go through a structure of set up an Azure environment for pen testing. Oh, here's a way that an attacker could take a basic reader access and escalate that to a contributor reader access. Here are like about 5 different methods an attacker could do. And guess what? Here are hands-on labs that you can do that are already built in, that you can follow those hands-on lab to follow those. And then, that's chapter 1. And then you go to chapter 2, how to escalate from contributor to that. So that was the reason why we wrote the book, was because there was basically nothing out there that someone could sit down to take and go through that structure of how attackers exploit like Azure environments and to do that. So guessing, I'll highly recommend reading a book on Azure pen testing for ethical hackers that Carl and myself wrote. Another thing that could help in terms of transitioning to that is that there's some new courses that are coming out now. Some of them might be expensive. So for example, there is one that I saw out there that I'll put the link in the chat window. It's a bit expensive, but it's a very good course. It's written by someone that knows what she's talking about. So I'll put the link in the chat window. So she has her own company called Zintra. But essentially what she did was she's highlighted like about multiple methods. Like I think like, tons of methods, more than 30 different methods that attackers can use or attackers can use to exploit an Azure environment, a Microsoft 365 environment. And then she has videos that walks through all of those attack paths, right? So, because to me, again, that just gives you like a structure so that instead of you just having to, bounce back and forth, you have a structure of, here is how an attacker would do that. You actually go to practice that. Again, the training is a bit expensive. I think it's about $1,500 or so for this one. So I'll really recommend those two if you're looking to transition to Azure pen testing guessing. So I recommend the book that Carl and myself wrote, and I recommend this training by Zintra.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I also need to get myself a copy of the book.
Are you looking to transition to cloud security also?
Yes, I would love to.
Oh, okay. Do you currently work in security?
No,
No.
I do no, not at the moment.
But you have an interest in security.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. So it's very interesting. Let's catch up and let's discuss. I
Okay.
actually have like a few people. So one of the things, by the way, that I've seen, which I hope that we
Yeah.
can replicate in Nigeria, is the Kenyan environment in Africa. Speaking about Africa, the Kenyan environment, I think they've done an amazing work of how they've embedded this into universities and everything. So, for example, I have some people helping me doing some research in cloud security for some of the personal
Okay.
projects that I'm working with. So, and a lot of the people that are helping me to do like some of those research, and by the way, it's paid research also. they
Okay.
actually like are from like the Kenyan environment because we found out that they had strong cloud knowledge already, and they had like curiosity for security, and we're able to bring them on to essentially help us like do some research that we didn't have like the time to do for some of the cases. So
Okay.
yeah.
I would love that. So I'll reach out to you definitely. Okay, so we have another question here from Franca. What are the certifications you will recommend for security, SC or the AZ exams?
Yeah. So very good one. So AZ exams. So let me help to distinguish this. Right, there are multiple paths, career paths in security. So when you're building something, right? It's like when you're creating something and you're building something, you need people that will put together a strong architecture, right? Something that
Yeah.
would be strong, right? So that's absolutely needed in any society. And then after you put that together, you may need people that may audit what has been done, validate, do quality assessment of what has been done, make sure all that is good. And then after that, if there were to be incidents, you also need people like the firefighting department, the emergency department that will respond in case there are like any issues. So it depends on which part of security interests you, right? So the area of security that I work in, right? So the area of security that I work in the area where when you're building your environment, that's when I want to get involved, right? In terms
Okay.
of here's how your structure should look like. Here's how your environment should look like, right? Or you're going to have 5 Azure environment and you're going to be using this Azure service with this Azure service to create this solution, to create this product. Okay. From a threat modeling perspective, here are the areas that you need to focus on in terms of security. And then helping you to prioritize that to say, there are about 100 things that you could be doing, but you have limited manpower and everything. So these are the top 3. If you were to focus on things that will get you the best result, focus on these top
Okay.
3. That's the area that I get involved in, right? Some other people get involved. So then there's the offensive pen testing one that I dabble in once in a while. But somebody that does that a lot. So this guy on Twitter, you may want to follow him. His name is Levon Gray. He's African American, awesome, brilliant guy. So he goes by the name OMI. So that's his handle on Twitter. So he is an Azure pen tester, right? So he wrote like a lot of like the frameworks. He wrote like a tool called Storm Spotter for pen testing Azure, for Azure attack graphing and all the other stuff. So they focus on, oh, you thought you've built your building. Let's shake the building. Let's do quality assessment. Let's see how strong a building is. So essentially, they'll pen test your environment, see if they find anything. So if you think that you're much more interested in the part where you're getting involved when the building's being built, the AZ exams are critical to you because you need to understand how the building works, how the building is going to be put together for you to be able to give an input in terms of here's how you need to secure that. For those that are interested in the aftermath of now you finish building the building, there's an emergency that's happening, somebody's attacking the building and all that stuff. Now we have to respond to that. The SE certifications will be helpful to you, right? Because those are about security operations. Those are about day-to-day security operations, identifying incidents, responding to incidents. So those will help you there. You can probably guess that there's that middle part of the pen testing people. Is there anything for them? None. So which is why I'll recommend some other things, because essentially there's nothing to help them to really cover that aspect, right? To say, so you need like training like the ones offered by Zintra, books like the one that we wrote, and other additional information following certain people to be able to keep yourself up to date in terms of what is going on in the methods that you can use to attack an Azure environment, exfiltrate data and on for credentials and essentially perform different attacks and in that environment. So that one, there's really nothing out there. You need to either go for books or go for other trainings or follow certain people, if that makes sense. So I hope that clarifies for you, Franca. So SE, if you're more interested in responding to incidents day to day, AZ, if you're more interested in the architecture and design, security design and architecture.
Okay, thank you. I think that should answer Franca's question. So, okay, we also have, okay, I think you dropped a number of course certifications that can be taken. The SC200, the SC300. Okay, I think Okoyemi also mentioned that we have the CCSE certification.
Yeah.
And there's also the
so
Microsoft Security Bounty Program. Okay.
Yeah. So I can
Okay.
see what Antonio is mentioning that, yeah. So Microsoft has like a security bounty program for those that love like a security researcher career. So where Microsoft goes, if you can identify certain vulnerabilities in Azure, for example, you'll be paid certain certain amount of money. There were some people that had identified one last week. They work for a company called Wiz, which is a cloud security company called Wiz, and they figure out a way to essentially exploit Bing to get to the point where they could exfiltrate data from enterprise emails by issuing a token via Bing. So it's like very critical vulnerability that they found, right? And Microsoft paid them like about $40,000, I think, that they're going to be donating. So the company that I work with, the security research team at Palo Alto Networks, our security research team is called Unit 42, and security research team has identified about 2 vulnerabilities on Azure. So one of them, they were able to escape from an Azure container instance to essentially take over the entire cluster and take over other customers' workload if they want to, right? So the vulnerability is called AzureScape. Another one is called FabricScape, where they were able to, again, to escape from a container and take over an entire Azure Service Fabric cluster. So that's a career path. That's, I want to mention that that's, we've not, like, none of the certifications that we're talking about really prepares you for that. If you're going to be going down that career path in terms of like, the one that Antonio is mentioning, in my opinion, you need to have a strong development background, right? So, because a lot of things that you need to do is you need to understand how to study the code, how to figure out vulnerabilities that exist in code, how to reverse engineer like essentially existing application and existing services to figure out like vulnerabilities in them. So that, in my opinion, that requires strong development experience and strong development background. But what you also see is that you don't get to wherever you want to get to like in a day. If that's like the path that you want to get to, there are multiple approaches for you to get to that path. You may start out as an architect or start out as a security operations engineer, maybe do some development work later, and then maybe come back to security. So there are different paths you could take.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think okay, you dropped the link for Zintra. If,
Yes.
if you're interested in training with them, please you can use the link to do that. Okay, Antonio also mentioned a good source for pen testing repository are also all the OSINT article within Defender TI threat intelligence. You can get up raw data there.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point. And that's one
Right.
that's super interesting for those that are sort of like doing like the pen testing aspect, and also for people that are responding to like incidents. So um getting all those Microsoft has like Microsoft they have like the security graph where you can get a lot of the information with regards to threat intelligence and what's going on. So if you're using Microsoft product, a lot of those intelligence are already being pulled in to make decisions in a lot of Microsoft products already, right? So but
Okay.
that's a very good point, Antonio.
Okay. Okay. Um, Tosin said she would also love to be part of the Kenyan project.
Madam Tosin is a very, very busy lady. She's super busy.
Done.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have another question. What aspect of CloudSec will your new book cover, and when will it be released?
Okay. So actually, like after this call, so I can give you like a little bit of scoop here. I won't go into details. So I'll give you a
Okay.
little bit of scope. So there are actually two books I'm working on. So
Wow.
one of them, hopefully, that will be released sooner. So that one will be focused not on cloud security per se, even though there's an aspect of security to it. That's focused on Azure network engineering, right? But there's like about two chapters there that focuses on network security, right, in the Azure cloud. So it's more like about Azure network engineering. That one is almost completed. If I can just stop researching things that are not related to the book and get back to focusing on the core things of the book itself.
Oh,
However, the fourth one is focused on Azure security, and similar to the Azure pen testing book, it's an area of Azure security that you don't really see any certification exam cover, any course cover.
okay.
So some of you may know a lady called Joy Lin. So Joy Lin is a senior security advocate at Microsoft. Her name is Joy Lin Kiwi from Kenya. So so you can Google her. She's another good person to follow in cloud security. So Joylene and
Okay.
myself are going to be coming together, and we're going to be writing a book on DevSecOps for Azure. So that's an area that you do not currently see any book on. Joylene has tremendous experience in that area. I bring a lot of experience and expertise, understanding like the Azure cloud and understanding of the Azure platform. So we're going to be combining both together to come up with a practical book, because that's the goal in terms of something that you can go through in a structured format, that you can go through and go, how do I implement DevSecOps for Azure? In something that's not just abstract, that's just giving me philosophical, philosophy is good and it's important, right? However, there must be a term where you can now translate that in terms of building a career from philosophical like approach in terms of, yeah, you have to shift security to the left and all the other stuff. But what does that look like? Right? What does that look like if I've got if I've got a, if you ask me to just do like a SaaS and I've got like 500 vulnerabilities in my environment, I don't have enough manpower to close that. What does that look like from a practical perspective? So that's what we're looking to focus on in that book. So that'll be focused more on DevSecOps and supply chain security for the Azure cloud. So I'm meeting with
Okay.
Joylene after this call today, and we're going to kick off,
Okay.
the first chapter and everything. So hopefully by beginning of next year, that one will be done.
Okay. Wow. Seems you have a very busy schedule ahead of you. Okay. I think on the chat you also dropped okay, Leron Gray and some other persons that could be
Yes.
followed to learn more about cloud
Yeah.
security. Okay.
And
Antonio
also,
also
I forgot to mention, follow Antonio. Follow Antonio.
yeah.
Antonio has tons of experience. follow
Yes, Antonio has just been
Antonio.
giving us wisdom, wise words on the consistently.
Yeah. So
Thank you so
Antonio
much, Antonio.
actually, yeah. So he works currently also in cloud security, and even though he's not come on to speak at any of our events before, we really need to get Antonio to speak at one of our events. But he has tons of
Yeah.
experience. So follow Antonio, and it's super helpful also. I follow Antonio, and one of the good things that I get from following Antonio is he regularly shares updates relating to the security aspect. I think Antonio focuses, Antonio, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you focus more on identity security for cloud. So Antonio regularly shares updates that, I go, oh, I didn't know that that was announced. So, and, thanks very much for sharing those. So I'll highly recommend following Antonio also. It's part of the people to follow.
Okay. 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 I think you mentioned governance and compliance and information protection are examples. As examples, are a branch of Microsoft security that Microsoft positions under the family of the SC family. Okay, I think that's
Yeah.
for the certification exam. Okay. I think the next question here, we're running out of time. What resources, podcast, blogs do you use to keep up to date?
Yeah. So very good point. So it depends on what you're keeping up to date. So to keep up to date with the Azure Cloud platform, um, I don't think I have enough time to bring all of that up. However, so Azure publishes updates that they make to the Azure cloud, right? So
Yeah.
somebody created a Twitter bot. I think it's called Azure Updates. So I'll look for that Twitter account. So I follow that Twitter account and I have a notification set up. So anytime Microsoft announces something new, so it's the Azure Update bot. So that's where I sort of like stay up to date. Is there's a
Yeah.
lot also it's called the Azure Update bot on Twitter. So because I don't want to be
Okay.
going set a calendar reminder to be going back and forth, to be checking a
Yeah.
certain website. So whenever there's a new announcement, the Twitter bot, the Azure Update bot on
Reminds you.
Twitter, which I'll put the link in the chat window, picks it up, sends a tweet. I read the tweet. If it's something that I think it's interesting from a security perspective, I click on it and read a little bit more about that. So that's one. So from an Azure security perspective, I'll say I just follow certain people. Again, people like Antonio, people like Carl Forsyth, people like Joylene Curry, people like Andrew Robbins.
Okay.
Those are people that I follow. So there are people that also like work at, and also like you want to focus on people that work for certain cloud security companies. So for example, people that work at Palo Alto Networks Cloud Security, for people like myself, so work at Palo Alto Network Cloud Security Prisma Cloud division. People
Okay.
that work at a company called Wiz, which is a cloud security startup that's growing massively. People that work for Datadog. So these are companies that are doing very interesting things on cloud security. So that's where you get information that Microsoft would not necessarily share with you. As much as we love Microsoft, there are lots of gaps and a lot of holes, right? So you need to be listening to things that Microsoft may not necessarily share with you to understand how you can properly position yourself and your company in a way that you won't be impacted if something, negative were to happen. So let me.
Okay.
So somebody asked about Antonio's handle, so let me get
And
that very
yeah.
quickly on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay. And someone also asked if you could drop the link to the course that you recommended earlier.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. So I'll drop two links. I'll drop Antonio's link. And the other thing that I also want to mention is if someone is interested in just keeping up to date in terms of Azure security, I
Yeah.
do have an Azure security meetup group that
Okay.
I sort of like host. So, and you may find value. I mean, you will know whether you'll find value in it or not. So, but I'll put the link in the chat window. So just have a look and see if it's something that you think will be valuable for your career. If you think you'll be valuable for your career, then follow that. So what we try to do is we try to have conversations that you typically not hear in the essentially Microsoft ecosystem, or the Microsoft ecosystem. You hear certain things that are very useful, right? But again, there's possibility to miss a lot of things. Again, I told you, like in the past 1.5 years, there's been about 15 vulnerabilities in the Azure cloud itself. You need to understand how those happened depending on your role. You need to understand how you can protect an organization if there were to happen another time, right? So those kind of things, you may not directly hear from Microsoft on those, but when you're listening to what is going on, from security researchers to all these companies that focus on cloud security like Palo Alto, Wiz, Datadog, and you're pulling in all this information, it will help you to cover a lot of the gaps that you won't get from, let's say, a Microsoft, certification course or anything.
Okay. 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 So the links have been shared. We can all click on them and go through them. So okay, I think for Gerson, please you can go through the link. Okay, it's 5 o'clock already. Um, I want to ask one question, please, before we go. So
No problem.
it's more of a technical question. So I wanted to ask, how do you approach designing a secure cloud architecture organization? What are the factors
Yeah.
that you would consider if you're going to design a secure cloud architecture for an organization?
Yeah. So that's very interesting because it depends on the type of organization, the size of the organization. There's a lot of things that depends on, right? So traditionally, people would say start from like the identity aspect of things, right? Start from the identity security. You have to have a strong way of managing identities. Who has access to your environment? And that is not as easy as it sounds. Just last year, there were over 2,750 new permissions that Microsoft released to the Azure Cloud Platform. About 2,750, right? How many organizations have security teams? They can go through those 2,750 permissions and understand, oh, this is a very high risk permission, right? We need to be concerned if any role includes this permission, who this role is going to be assigned to. Number one. Number two is looking at those 2,750 permissions and going, how can we use this to optimize how we are assigning permissions to people? Maybe in a situation where we've assigned the permission to Olumide in the past, that maybe in
Yeah.
a broad way, and Microsoft releases a new permission that I can assign the same permission to Olumide, but in a much more granular way. I'm taking advantage of that. So I'll say probably there's a lot of things to look into, but identity security is probably a key one that you
Okay.
cannot afford to miss out, and that will probably be a place where you see a lot of the focus in terms of organizations. It also now depends when I work with teams in terms of do they have developers that are building things in their cloud platforms, because that changes the whole dynamics in terms of how I approach that. So in terms of understanding how developers can begin to do things in a secure way when transitioning to the cloud, right? So there's a lot of things to look into that. But I'll say
So
if I were to leave you with one word answer today, to keep it simple, I'll say start first with identity and then build everything else on top of that.
thank you very much. I think it's been a very insightful section. It's been a pleasure having you on the call, sharing from your wealth of knowledge. I'm sure every other person that has also listened on this conversation has gained a lot. I said everybody's saying David, awesome section, great talk. It's really been insightful. Just to round up, I don't know if you have anything you would like to also still finance
I just want
key
to say thanks
for
very
us
much,
to look
Sir
forward to it.
Olumide. Thanks very, very much for moderating this session. It's been an
So
amazing conversation with you. First time meeting you, but I can tell you're an awesome person. So thanks very much for this.
yeah,
I can see that your child was sort of like
same here.
next year and yeah. So interested in security already.
Yeah,
So
I had
interested
to
in
just
cloud
pick that.
security already. So so again, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for hosting this session. Thanks very much for our madam in the
Okay.
background. Madam Oluwatosin for setting this up. So she's been an amazing leader
Tosin,
for the Azure Nigeria community. So thanks very much for the great work. And thanks very much to everyone
thank
for
you very
joining
much.
also.
Our pleasure. I don't know if Madam Tosin will have to share any word with us just before we round it up.
Madam Tosin, come online. We
Can you
want to
hear
see
me?
your face. We want to
Okay.
hear from
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Hello. Nothing much. It's just to thank you, for your time, for making this session, a great one. I enjoyed my time, and it was nice, listening to all those answers. The questions that were asked were very brilliant, and it's really a great pleasure to have you both here. So Thank you, and to our participant, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I look forward to your book. And
Yeah.
yeah, I really look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Um,
Thanks.
that will be all for today. We look forward to subsequent meetups. We're still meeting next week. We have a Azure Talk series. So please, all our listeners, please stay involved, join the community, share your questions, share your learnings, so that we can all learn from each other. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you for your time and knowledge. That will be all for today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.